Well, thank you for inviting me here tonight. I'm really excited to be here and share some of the work I've been doing. Got some of my contact information. I'm the guy behind breakintochat.com. In my normal life, my day job, I work for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. You might know me as the guy who was falsely accused of hacking by the governor in 2021. The governor's accusation, of course, was false, but I do really love computers. And I particularly love old computers. And so here's a picture of me with my dad. I'm on a Atari 1040 STE, and he's on probably a Mac 2CX back there. Got my disc golf discs and a can of off, so I'm ready for action there. Some people call it retro computing or vintage computing, but to me, it's just fun. I think of it as a hobby, like, you know, classic cars. And for me, a big element of it is just nostalgia, remembering the things that I loved about when I was younger. Same for, I think, a lot of classic car people. Another part for me is discovery. Learning things that I didn't know back then about the people who made the stuff, or about how the hardware works, or about how tricks that were done with the software. Now that I'm all grown up, I can actually learn the things that I couldn't understand when I was younger. And I love innovation, kind of like what you guys do here, I'm sure, doing new things with old stuff, whether that's new things with software or with the hardware. And on my website, breakintochat.com, I like to do all three of those things. And sometimes I'm writing essays about moments from my past like this, reminiscing about the time that I got my Atari Jaguar, which I still have, and is hooked up right now in the basement to our TV. And so the nostalgia part is something that I really love. Sometimes I'm interviewing people from the past, like Gary Martin, who is the creator of Trade Wars 2002, and lots of other VBS game creators. And then sometimes I try experiments. Like one time I thought, what if I could make an ANSI animation with parallax, which was probably impossible to do back in the day, but now with really fast internet speeds and massive amounts of memory, it's totally possible to make a parallax scrolling text animation. This is pure text, and actually if you were to connect to my bulletin board, you could see this in a terminal. And I can even play this on my old Atari, it just goes really slow. So I also do a lot of digital preservation projects, and that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. I want to spend most of this presentation discussing my efforts to research and rescue the software of Ya'akov Kirschen. He's a cartoonist in Israel. But over the years, much of my preservation work has been aimed at saving the history of bulletin board systems. So I'd like to tell you about that real quick. Is there anybody who doesn't know what a bulletin board system is? Okay, this crowd looks like people who know what BBS are. Anybody call fire escapes BBS back in the day? All right, if you call BBSs in the mid-90s, you definitely called fire escapes BBS at one time or another. This is me in roughly sometime after, I started BBSing in 1992, this is probably a year or two after that. You can see I'm in the middle of typing a message. I've got an ASCII Enterprise signature there on whatever that message is. I loved BBSs, and I especially loved BBS door games. One of my favorites was Solar Realms Elite. And sure, these games were just text with some colors, and maybe sometimes you could make some rudimentary graphics out of it. They were just text. But in the early 1990s, these were the most accessible multiplayer online games that you could play. They offered the chance to play against dozens of other opponents. And for me, I was drawn into the social interactions that they made possible. So making alliances, breaking them, lying, scheming, sowing disinformation. I just loved that. And it's an experience that at that time I could only get playing on a BBS. You couldn't get that at the arcade, you couldn't get that playing on your Nintendo console. And so for a brief window of time, BBS games were the only way to get that social experience. Then of course came the internet, and those kind of things became commonplace. And so BBSs and BBS games were gradually forgotten. And it's that forgetting that has really spurred my interest in preserving retro computing history. I've seen over and over how our digital world is more ephemeral than we realize. The software, the social media posts, the digital documents that we create all the time, they're here today. They can easily be gone tomorrow, erased by arbitrary corporate decisions, hardware failures, neglect, time, so many other things. There's a million ways that our stuff just can get killed. And so we have to be active if we want to preserve the important parts of our past for folks in the future who might want to learn from it. And so that's what sparked me to create my website, Break Into Chat. As an adult, I was surprised how little there was about BBS door games. Historians and academics didn't really seem to engage with it at all. And then in 2012, the editors at Wikipedia decided that most articles about BBS door games were not notable and they were going to delete them. And so when that happened, I forked all the articles that Wikipedia had at that time onto my own new website, Break Into Chat, and created my own wiki, where over time I've expanded the articles. I've added collections of like every release of important games. So I have dozens of releases of like Solar Realms Elite, for example. And then the big thing that I really wanted to do is to seek out and interview as many creators of those games as I could. So that's people like Gary Martin, or Amit Patel, who became one of the first engineers at Google. He wrote Solar Realms Elite. And some of these other guys you see on the screen, including Shooter Jennings, the musician Shooter Jennings, who is making BBS door games today. Yes, a successful musician is actually spending his time making these old-fashioned games for probably a few dozen people to play. But it's what he loves, and it's what inspires him creatively. And so that's why, to me, this is such an important thing to say, because it did fire the imaginations of the people who were part of this, and who are still part of it today. I've got a lot of cool stories and stuff that I can share about BBSs, but tonight what I want to do is take you down the Kirschen rabbit hole and share with you what I've learned and what I've saved from Yaakov Kirschen. And so this very floppy disk is the one that sent me down the Kirschen rabbit hole. This disk must be, it's got to be almost 40 years old. The label on here is written by my uncle. And basically what happened is in 2014, I wanted to write something for Break Into Chat that was going to have a Mother's Day theme. And so I immediately, when I thought, okay, Mother's Day, the first thing that popped into my head was this old program, Mom and Me, which I had for my Atari ST. My Uncle Jim had given me that disc and a pile of other discs in the late 1980s when he gave my family his, his used Atari ST. So Mom and Me was one of two graphical chatbots. They were marketed as bio-tunes that were created by the Israeli cartoonist Ya'akov Kirschen. So this is Mom and Me, and then the other one was Murray and Me. So Mom was the kind of stereotypical Jewish mother nagging you about everything, and Murray was kind of the lovable loser Jewish uncle who thinks that he's been trapped inside of a computer. So I remember playing around with these when I was a kid. I thought, oh, this will be a fun, real quick Mother's Day post. So I'll just do something about Mom. But so I didn't have an Atari anymore. I had to sell it when I was in college. So I had no way to use this. I still had the discs, but I didn't have an Atari computer. But I wasn't worried about that. I figured all I had to do is search online. I'll find a disk image of Mom and pop it into an emulator and then make some screenshots or a video. But when I went looking, I couldn't find any disk images of Mom or Murray. And that was really surprising to me. It was hard for me to believe that these programs hadn't been pirated or copied or something by someone. So it was all the more surprising because these programs had been advertised and sold by Antic Magazine, which is one of the big Atari magazines in the mid to late 80s. And not only was it featured in their catalog, but they ran full-color ads for it in multiple issues. And as I learned more and started to dig into the history of these programs, I found out that Kirschen and his biotunes had been profiled in multiple newspapers in 1985. So here is the New York Times, which did a really big piece by Tom Friedman, who was a big name in the New York Times. And it was also the Los Angeles Times, the London Times, and other newspapers. And so, again, just kind of drove home, why can't I find these disc images? So I found that Kirschen is still alive, and he had a Twitter account where he was still posting daily cartoons. And so I reached out to him to ask if he might still have copies of these discs in Israel. And so his wife, Sally, wrote back to tell me the heartbreaking news that she had thrown out all of the 3.5-inch discs in their house less than a year before I reached out to ask. They had saved them for decades, and then less than a year before somebody finally asked, she tossed them. And so, yeah, what can you do? And this brings me back to my point from earlier, that our digital world is more ephemeral than we realize. When we don't actively take steps to save software, we risk losing it, and a lot of stuff is gone forever. So I did end up writing that Mother's Day blog post in 2014, and I shared the bits and pieces of history that I had found leading up to that. But little did I know, I had only scratched the surface. There was way more to the Mom and Murray story than I knew. But we'll get to that later. In the blog post, though, I asked if anyone ever came across copies of these discs to reach out and get in touch with me. And 5 years later, somebody did. Kevin A was his name. He found original copies of the color and monochrome versions of Murray and Me in the original antic packaging. So he imaged the disc and took photos and scans of the documentation and all of the packaging and sent those to me. And then for my part, in the intervening years, I had obtained an Atari Mega STE, which enabled me to try my Mom and Murray discs. And as it turns out, I was able to get one clean read of the Mom disc, and so I was able to see Mom again. My Murray disc was corrupt, but that was okay because Kevin had it. And so between the two of us, Mom and Murray were saved. But like I said, that was just the tip of the iceberg, because I kept corresponding with Kirschen. And I learned that he had worked on games and software both before Murray and Mom and afterward, and some of it was really ambitious. This unlikely software developer had rubbed shoulders with tech titans like Jack Tramiel at Atari, like directly, Irving Gould at Commodore, and Bob Rosenshine, who later became the founder of Answers.com, and many other folks. And so a multi-year odyssey unfolded as I started chasing the stories behind the software and the man. And over the years, I've interviewed dozens of people, and I've examined hundreds of pages of documents from all different sources, museums, and the America-Israel Bilateral Research Foundation, all different kinds of stuff. There's actually a lot of material about this software that nobody knows anything about. So along the way, I've succeeded in saving at least 10 pieces of software, depending on how you count some of the demos and experiments. And pretty much all of these have been lost to history. The only exception was Murray. There was a German version of Murray that was saved on some kind of a pirated disc. But other than that, all the rest of the software was completely unarchived. So I've given you a glimpse already of Mom and Murray, but I want to share all this other software with you tonight as well. It ranges from Jewish educational games for the Apple II to an algorithmic music composer that was originally developed for the Amiga and was later ported to the IBM PC. But first, I would be remiss if I didn't introduce you to Yaakov Kirschen. So I'm going to do that first, and then we'll come back to the software. For 50 years, this year is the 50th anniversary, last month actually, was the 50th anniversary of Dry Bones, which is Kirschen's great life's work. It's a cartoon that it debuted in the Jerusalem Post in 1973, and was often reprinted and also syndicated in newspapers around the globe. And sometimes it even caught the attention of world leaders and presidents, including Jimmy Carter, who hand wrote this note that he sent to Kirschen in 1977, This is at the height of peace talks between Egypt and Israel that Carter was facilitating. So he made this influential cartoon that started in 1973. But he didn't always live in Israel, and he wasn't always called Ya'akov Kirschen. He was born Gerald Neil Kirschen in 1939, and he grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And Kirschen wasn't particularly religious. His family was not really observant, but his Jewish identity would become very important to him as an adult. In college, Kirschen studied fine art and painting, but his irreverent sense of humor is what led him into a career in cartooning. He was a really good fit at Cracked magazine, which is where some of his first published cartoons appeared in 1960, and his cartoons continued to appear in other publications throughout the 1960s. So how did this cartoonist get into computers? Well, it happened in a really roundabout way. I'm sorry, I missed the Cracked. Well, if you want to read it, here's his first Cracked cartoon. How did he get into computers? It was through this guy, Lewis Robbins. And this is a rabbit. There's so many rabbit holes with this research. I would love to tell you all about this, but I'm just going to scratch the surface here. Lewis Robbins was a practitioner of reinforced learning, and it was a method that he used to create self-instructional training courses for big companies. So they would kind of record on records or tapes these training courses that people would then listen to and follow in order to learn things like Morse code, signaling, and other stuff. And it's important to know that in the 1950s and 60s, the banking and the financial and retail industries are being disrupted by a new technology called electronic data processing, EDP. As you can see in this ad, this is an advertisement from National Cash Register, NCR. NCR and IBM were two of the big companies that were making EDP systems, and they promised that their EDP systems would let you automate your payroll, and then you could lay off all your clerical workers, because in those days they had armies of clerical workers who were doing all the calculations of payroll and sales and all this kind of stuff. So automation is not new. It's been going on forever, and even computerized automation. And if you watch Star Trek from the 60s, you see the influence of stuff like this in the episodes when they're harping about computers and automation. It's because it was already disrupting stuff back then. Anyway, so IBM and NCR are creating this technology, and banks and other retailers are buying these systems. They're able to lay off the clerical workers, but they have a new need for operators and programmers for these EDP systems. And so there's a need for training because there's not enough of these folks to go around. So that's where Lewis Robbins and Kirschen come in. IBM and NCR hired Robbins to develop pre-recorded training courses on how to operate these machines. This is an NCR 500. So Robbins sent Kirschen to IBM and to NCR to meet with their cyberneticists, their computer scientists, to learn the ins and outs of computers. And he also was able to learn higher level ideas like game theory, the Turing test, and things like that, things that stuck with him into the 1980s. So anyway, by the late 1960s, Kirschen had been radicalized by the social and political changes that were sweeping across the country. He embraced Zionism, and he decided to move his family, to leave behind the cartooning career, leave behind the training courses that he had been developing. He had started a business in New York doing that on his own. Left all that behind to go to Israel. And he thought that when he got there, he'd start a new life with a new name and a new country. And given his background, he thought maybe I'll get involved in some high-tech industry, because Israel did have a lot of high-tech industries and still does today. But it really didn't work out that way. After 2 years, he fell back on his first love, cartooning. And he launched Dry Bones after finding that people were really responding to his humorous outsider's perspective on the idiosyncrasies of living in Israel. So now we're going to skip ahead to the 80s. The early 1980s were a heady time to be Yaakov Kirschen. This was the peak of the power of the newspaper industry, and as somebody who is well beyond the peak in the newspaper industry, I imagine what it must have been like to work at a big newspaper, an influential newspaper in a part of the world where all the attention was focused. And so his work was well known, republished in Jewish newspapers around the world. And so he had this name recognition, this clout that he used to kind of break in to the computer industry. And see, what was happening is in the late 70s, the microcomputer revolution started here in the United States with the Apple II and the Atari 400 and 800. That microcomputer revolution made it to Israel a little bit later. So by the early 1980s, around 80, 81, it started to take off there, and Kirschen wants in. He's never forgotten his interest and his love in that computer stuff, and now you can have it in your house. So he wants to get in on this. And so he used those connections and the clout that he earned on the success of Dry Bones to open doors and become a software developer. His first foray into software development began with the Gesher organization. Gesher means bridge in Hebrew. And their mission was to kind of bring together secular and religious Jewish young people in Israel. And they saw how popular arcades were becoming, and so they decided to open a computer games division, and they hoped that they could develop educational software with a Jewish perspective to kind of teach kids about their identity and their history. So Gesher's earliest efforts were simple text-based games. One of them was a quiz game called Jerusalem Squares, but they had bigger ambitions. They envisioned games that required graphics and animation. These games have been designed on paper, but graphics and animation were notoriously difficult on the Apple II, which was not really designed, unlike the Atari, which was designed to be like be almost like an arcade level experience. The Apple II was not that way. You had to do a lot of tricks to really make it sing. So Kirschen was the missing piece. He had what Gesher's programmers lacked, which was an artist's sensibility. And he also had experience with animation on television because he had done very rudimentary animated versions of his cartoon for some Israeli TV news programs in the late 70s. So Gesher also recruited a teenage cracker named Danny Weisberg, and he created an Apple II graphics library called Raster Master, which was sort of the engine that powered several of Gesher's Apple II games and some of Kirschen's later independent work.
What's that thing he's using?
Oh, so that is it's a tablet. It's a drawing tablet. I believe it's called the Apple Graphics tablet. And it's exactly what you expect. They even had that in the early 80s. They of course were very imprecise, and as I show you some of these games, you'll see the imprecision in the graphics. He wanted to draw everything by hand. Most of the big publishing houses, develop their own in-house art software to kind of get in and refine the pixels and stuff. He didn't really have that, and so the graphics are very rough around the edges, and the Apple II exacerbates that problem with the weird pixel coloration things that happen in high resolution. Let's see here. So I'm going to show you 4 games that we saved, that we recovered from floppy disk, and I need to say here that I was helped in this by Keith Hack, I received these discs from Sally Ariel, Kirschen's wife, after years of correspondence and after they had seen how invested I was in this research. Turns out they didn't toss out the 5 1/4-inch discs, only the 3 1/2-inch discs. So we were able to save software for the Apple II and the IBM PC. And Keith Hack took care of the imaging of these discs. And so he gets high praise for his work in doing that. So I want to start by talking about the 3 small games. These were 3 action games. Each of these 3 games was based on an existing arcade game. So Noshkosh is sort of a clone of Pac-Man. You've got a little guy who's named Chunky who's running around eating stuff. But the purpose is different. This is to teach kashrut, which is Jewish dietary law. Borders is a platform game like Donkey Kong, where you're running on platforms and you're moving up and you're jumping to avoid enemies. So Borders, the action is very similar to the Donkey Kong action, but the difference here is that this is a game that's supposed to teach about persecution of the Jewish people in different eras of history. And then finally, Aleph Invaders, which is based on Space Invaders, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. So what I'm going to do, hopefully this will work okay, is I'm going to switch to the emulator. Okay, there it is. And let's see here. Hopefully this is going to work. All right, so you can see that Chunky here has a kippah or a yarmulke. And we're going to play this with the keyboard. So the keys are left and right arrow, and then up and down is A and Z. And the key here is carrots are safe to eat anytime, but you've got to be careful about when you eat the dairy and the meat. There's like a delay of.
What do you know when you got it wrong?
You die. So there it goes. You're being chased by 3 non-kosher bad guys, and I don't remember their names off the top of my head, but after I finish this demo, I will read them to you. And the A and Z is, even though I've been practicing this demo, the A and Z is still killing me. Ah, God. I think I got one more life. And I had to say, like, when I first started playing this game, we successfully imaged this maybe a year ago, year and a half, something like that. I was overwhelmed by the game screen. Unlike Pac-Man, which is very spare and elegant, this is just full of sprites. And it's kind of overwhelming, but like as I play it more, it actually does have a pretty high replayability, and I am finding myself intrigued by wanting to find the route that's going to let me eat all this stuff, and I haven't quite found it yet. I've noticed there are some kind of rows and columns where it's just carrots that are safe to go on, and but I just haven't quite worked out. Oh no, I got kicked out of my own meeting.
I did that.
So that's Noshkosh, and the
levels always the same.
I have never beaten the first level, so I imagine they're all the same, but I can't swear to it. Peter Pig, Larry Lobster, and Freddy Frog's Legs are the non-kosher enemies that you have to avoid. So Borders, the beautiful thing about Borders is the floppy disk that we imaged was made special. It might have been for a show that they went to. The disk has both a normal play mode, but also has a demo mode, and that's what I'm going to show you, is the demo mode, because we can skip to the end of it. So give me just a second. Okay, I'm just going to pause it for a second. So I'm starting this near the end of the game, and there were already several levels underneath. But you can see the Spanish Inquisition, Poland, Russians, and Cossacks. Each of these is a historical period where the Jewish people face persecution, or like a region where they face persecution. And so there's sort of period-appropriate enemies that are chasing you. And what you have to do is run over to the Torah, jump up and touch it, and then that unlocks an elevator on the other side. And then you run over to the other side. When you get to the elevator, it lifts you up to the next level, and that's how you advance. And this game does actually have an ending, which we'll watch. So Russians and Cossacks. I'm trying to remember what these guys look like. So there's like a Roman Empire level that has like Roman soldiers. I forget what the other ones are, but they really look Russian. But what I love about this demo is there was so much about this game I could not figure out. And then when I played the demo, I was like, oh, that's how you do it. And it makes a whole lot more sense. the disc that we got had no instructions, but I found there's a museum called the Renaud Museum that has a copy of this game, and it was, without getting into the history of it, it was handwritten by Kirschen, and he hand wrote on the disc the instructions for how to play this game and Noshkosh, which was extremely helpful when I found that, because I didn't have handwritten instructions anywhere else. So now that he's gotten through all this, he's about to immigrate to the United States. Getting in a ship, sailing across, you can see a very rudimentary Statue of Liberty in the right-hand side there. And when he gets to the U.S., you're going to see the big cities and some things that the U.S. is known for, I guess. Pizza, hamburger, video. But, and this is an important theme that you'll see in another game I'm going to show you in a minute. He's not staying in the United States. Now he's immigrating again to Israel, just like Kirschen did, and many other folks did in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and today. So this is the final screen here, and he has arrived to Israel, and you can see the Stars of David in the corner, the Hebrew, and the state flag of Israel waving there. But you can see what I mean about the kind of the artifacts and the just the jaggies all over it. Without special software tools, which I don't think he really had, very difficult to get the Apple II graphics very precise. Okay, so that was Borders. The last game, Aleph Baders, I'm not going to spend time demoing it tonight, but basically the way you can probably tell if you're familiar with Space Invaders. Space Invaders is a game where aliens are descending from the top of the screen and you're shooting up at them. Aleph Baders is the letters of the Hebrew alphabet that are descending from the top of the screen, and then you're controlling a finger, and when you hit fire, then it reaches up and pokes one of the letters and it disappears. Now, what you're trying to do, I believe, is get them in alphabetical order. And so, in Hebrew, I believe Aleph is like alpha, the letter A. Bait is like beta, the letter B. And then there's Gimel and on and on. But this was meant to teach kids the Hebrew alphabet. And all these games were really aimed at American Jewish kids rather than Israeli kids. You'll notice, I mean, these things are mostly English. So, yeah. These were being designed with an American audience in mind. So those were the three small games. And then Gesher had a bigger game called the Georgia Variations. And this game has a complicated history, but basically this is it's a choice-based narrative. You might, another term would be like a choose-your-own-adventure game. So it's a story, a narrative, and at certain points, after reading a block of text, you're given, 1, 2, or 3 choices to make. And you play the role of Boris Goldberg, who's a Jewish boy living in Eastern Europe in the 1800s. And you make different choices throughout the game that kind of affect the storyline of his life. And you can kind of branch out, but ultimately, all the choices funnel back to the same final point, that he's going to immigrate to Atlanta, Georgia. And the reason for that, well, actually, unlike the previous 3 games, this is entirely original, and it's based on historical research. Kirschen, many of the illustrations in this game are derived from historical photographs, which he probably put on that pad and kind of traced over. But the thing about this game is it's not like interactive fiction. Like I said, even though it took 4 floppy disks, the scope of the game is actually somewhat limited, and I was able to play out every single possibility in the game and map them on that diagram that I just showed you. So the scope isn't huge, but there is a lot of variety in it, so different kids playing it next to each other might have quite different experiences playing the game. Kirschen, or actually I should say Gesher, was hired to create this game by the Atlanta Jewish Federation. They wanted to have an interactive exhibit in 1983, which to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Jewish settlement in the state of Georgia. And so I actually have correspondence between Gesher and the lady at the Jewish Federation. I was looking at it earlier tonight, and she's complaining because the first two games that they sent to her were Borders and Oshkosh, which have no explicitly Atlanta or Georgia elements to them at all. And she's like, "We hired you guys to make games about Georgia. These games are cute. Where's my Georgia stuff?" That was the gist of the letter. Anyway, this was one of the games that they made that had specifically Georgia content. And Kirschen attended. He was in the United States multiple times to show this software, including at the booth at this big, I forget what they call it, not a congress, but it's like a huge assembly that was happening in Atlanta that year. In interviews, he was very proud of this game, and he really talked about it very hyperbolically. He described it as a groundbreaking rolly, but he spelled and defined rolly in various ways. So one way was rolly, R-O-L-I, is short for robotic literature. And then the other way is rolly, is like the word roll. This is a story that you have a role in. But he was really proud of this game. I'm not sure if he was really aware of other games in this style. I'm not sure that there were a whole lot of graphical choose-your-own-adventure style games, but there certainly were Infocom style games and kind of King's Quest, Space Quest kind of games at that time. But I'm not sure that he was aware of any of those in Israel. So he felt that this was very groundbreaking, and to a lot of the audiences he was showing it to, it probably was. So after working with Gesher on these projects, Kirschen had honed his skills, and now he understood what it took to make a computer game, and he was ready to work independently. He told me that during one of his trips to the United States, he approached the Learning Company. Are you guys familiar with the Learning Company? They made a lot of big games in the 1980s that were very popular at schools and even at home. So he approached them and was able to get from them upfront funding to develop his own educational game. He called it You and Doc Possum. And he worked with Danny Weisberg, which is the teenager that I mentioned earlier. He was a software cracker, pirate in Israel, who was very talented and had created this game engine, a graphics engine. And so Danny Weisberg helped him on this game, and he also consulted with a biologist at the zoo in Jerusalem to develop the content for this game. And basically in this game you play a field mouse who is investigating nature mysteries, and he has to go to different habitats and interview the animals that live in those habitats to try to solve the mysteries. And when you do, you get this kind of cool dance screen. I'm just going to show you a little demo of it. So if you successfully solve a mystery, you get to have a break dance, and you can use your keyboard to kind of change the way that the field mouse dances, the different moves that she's making. So I can imagine that if you're a kid, this would be a fun reward for solving a case. And I have to say that, in my opinion, this is a pretty polished game. I think he did a really nice job of the game itself is very polished. What I have not been able to determine is why the Learning Company never published it. Which I've been working on. All the people I've talked to so far just don't remember this at all. And so there's potentially is Kirschen misremembering, but it seems very unlikely he would misremember or not be truthful about receiving upfront money from the Learning Company. In fact, this game, we have 3 copies of this game. One copy is unbranded, one copy has Learning Company branding, and another one has Antic branding. And the reason it has Antic branding is because the only reference you can find to this game, besides my own writing about it, is in a short-lived Apple II magazine that was called II Computing, II Computing. This was published by Antic the Atari guys. They decided for some reason to get into Apple II magazines in 1986 and 87, which was really late to be getting into Apple II publishing. They were the ones who published Murray and Mum. and that was in 86, or late 85, early 86. So they had a relationship with Kirschen, and I suspect what happened was they were launching this magazine, and they wanted to fill up their catalog with stuff to sell, and so they probably said, hey, do you have any Apple II stuff we can sell? And he said, yes, actually, I got this Doc Possum game. So they put it here. I don't believe very many copies, if any, sold. And there is no, other than my own work, you will not find copies of this game or other references to it anywhere else. So I'm still trying to resolve what happened with the Learning Company. Maybe someday we'll figure it out.
Was it actually developed? Was he the director of the Jerusalem Zoo, or was that just...
That is, I believe that's hyperbole. She wasn't the director. Her name was, if I remember correctly, Devorah Ben-Shal, and she was, I believe, a biologist or a zoologist.
Someone he was working with.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, he did really work with somebody from the zoo to develop the content for it. And there is a lot of content in it. It is pretty repetitive. So when you play this game, after you've done one or two mysteries, you're kind of like, yeah, okay, I'm done. But yeah, it does have a lot of good content. Okay, so I've shown you 5 different things for the Apple II from Kirschen. There's more. He made some experiments and some demos as well. All of it, all the Apple II stuff that we rescued from his floppy disks is on the Internet Archive. So if you want to try it at home and play it in your browser, you can. Just search for Yaakov Kirschen on the Internet Archive, and these are playable in your browser today. You can also download the disk images from my website, breakintochat.com. So all that stuff is accessible. Okay, so I want to share with you the last 2 projects. Artificial personality. So earlier I introduced you to Mom and Murray, right? These are the artificial personalities. Mom I had on this disc. These are some of the earliest pieces of entertainment software published for the Atari ST. In fact, Kirshen's crew had one of the first dozen Atari STs that was made. And how did that happen? Well, first I need to introduce you to one of Kirshen's big ideas, which was his concept, just for you. So the idea here is that instead of mass producing cheap, identical items, Kirshen's dream was to mass produce unique items or experiences, each one customized just for you. And he believed that this could be achieved by making a bunch of fit-together parts. So you kind of mass-produce these fit-together parts that were all different and could be recombined in a lot of ways to create the appearance of endless variation. It wasn't really endless, but it would feel that way. So this is his just for you concept. And so in 1984, during one of his tours in the United States, Kirschen was able to arrange a meeting with Jack Tramiel, who was a fan of his cartoon Dry Bones. And I actually reached Sam Tramiel, the son of Jack Tramiel. Sam Tramiel is the president of Atari, and it was a lifelong dream of mine to actually have interactions with the Tramiel, and I did. He confirmed for me that his father did meet and socialize with Yaakov Kirschen. So what happened is Kirschen pitched these concepts to Tramiel, and together they agreed that Kirschen would develop an Atari-powered kiosk that would print customized greeting cards, customized just for you, on demand. So this would be like a kiosk you find at Walgreens, and inside of it would be an Atari ST. You'd use it, and it would kind of guide you through the process of like, what kind of occasion is this for? You know, do you want it to be humorous or serious? You know, go through a series of steps and make you a card. That was the idea. So Tramiel helped Kirschen get financing to set up an American company. He had just established an Israeli firm that he called LKP, Latest Kirschen Project. And that's where he was hiring his programmers, was at LKP. But in order to get this big financial grant from this binational foundation called the Bird Foundation, he needed an American partner. He and his wife Sally both thought that the partner was going to be Atari. They were working directly with Jack Tramiel. Tramiel did not really want to be directly involved in this. And so what he did was he helped them set up a firm, which they named, of course, Just For You Incorporated. I've got this little screenshot here of something from microfilm. this is a document in their Bird Foundation grant application, and you can see under Just For You Inc., they have listed Jack Tramiel and Sam Tramiel as the American people running Just For You. It might be that this is just a misunderstanding on their part that was quickly resolved, but they really believed that Tramiel was going to be their American partner. And like I said, that quickly changed, and it ended up being that Kirschen was Just For You and LKP. Both of them were him. But they thought it was going to be the Tramiels. Anyway, he hired student programmers when professional programmers like Bob Rosenshine, who was initially, you can see his name on the bottom there. He's the guy that went on to found Answers.com. He was a big programmer at that time. They were hoping that he would be involved in this, but this was not really the right project for him. And they realized, you know what, we need to go with student labor that's much cheaper, and where we can tell them what to do instead of them telling us what to do. So that was their philosophy. Murray, the Murray character, started as the artificial personality in the user interface of the greeting card kiosk. So Kirschen had this idea, which he would carry into his next project, that there needed to be a very human connection. He felt that most computer software was extremely inhuman, inartistic, and it needed humanity. And so he wanted to have this big character that would kind of guide you through the process of making the greeting card. Anyway, I can't tell you all of this story because time is tight. There is a whole lot more to this. Basically, they spin off these characters at Atari's request so that Atari would have additional software to show at the London Computer Show in 1985. And that's how Mom and Murray became a thing. The greeting card project ultimately failed, but that was okay because Kirschen already was on to his next big idea. He was a big idea guy and constantly moving from one thing to the next. And his next big idea was artificial creativity. He wanted to teach a computer to compose new music by itself. Now, since we have not been deluged with AI-created music in the intervening decades, you can imagine that it didn't really catch on, but he did have some super novel ideas. So together with his team of student programmers, which he expanded, you can see that I think he had about 6 programmers. One of these people is not a programmer. The girl in yellow is the sister of a programmer, and then the lady in black, I think, is like a secretary. But the others are programmers, and then there's maybe 1 or 2 programmers not in this picture. So he took his staff at LKP and put them on this idea of, I want the computer to generate music. And again, this is the kind of the Just For You idea. So what they did, here's how they did it. They extracted the chords, melodies, and rhythms of existing pop songs and classical music and kind of other genres. So they would go through like a song at a time and try to extract these elements, and they would put them into a special database that they designed. Then their system, which was eventually called the Jiffy Box, JFY, Just For You. The Jiffy Box would take that musical DNA, which is what they called it, and recombine the pieces to make new music. So again, this is the Just For You concept, taking pre-existing parts, rearranging them to make a unique experience, unique music in this case. Now the original plan, the business plan, was to sell themed discs to Amiga owners. This was being developed on the Amiga. And so there was going to be things like Classic Elegance or Jazz Band, or you had a whole series of ones that they were planning to do. There was going to be a Beatles one. And actually the Beatles one was one that impressed a lot of people. So the idea was themed discs, and each disc was going to have an artificial personality interface. So this is the Classical Elegance one, I believe, and you can see it's got Bach. Bach is the big character that you're interacting with when you're making the music. It's got a big generate button that you would hit, and it would just start playing new music. And if you liked whatever it was playing at that moment, you could save it to play back later. Otherwise, it was kind of like in a loop where it would just keep making new stuff endlessly until you tell it to stop. So that was the idea, to sell it to Amiga customers, and also they were hoped. They said they had an arrangement with Commodore to bundle these discs with Amigas, but that fell through. So for various reasons, that partnership with Commodore did not work out, and they had to pivot. And what they tried to do was to market this Jiffy Box system to TV and film producers. They pitched it as a way, a low-cost way, to generate background music that you could use in your productions. Instead of hiring a composer and maybe even a costly band or an orchestra, use this system that'll make the music for you. And in 1988, Kirschen got a producer friend of his, or actually a production company, to use his system to score a TV documentary for the BBC. It was called the Demjanjuk Dossier, and it was a breaking news documentary about a very high-profile Nazi prison guard case trial that was happening in Israel at that time. So I want to play you a clip, and the sound is gonna come from here. I hope you'll be able to hear it, of the end credits. So let's see if it works. Can you make it out? You see there, he's credited with the music, and then also the JYF music generator, which is a mistake. It should have been JFY. Okay, so that's the end credits there. So, not the world's most amazing music, but he got it on TV on the BBC in prime time.
Heard worse.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And he was able to get, again, because of his connections and stuff, he was able to get coverage of it in newspapers like the Los Angeles Times. The Associated Press covered it and did, a big profile on him and on this system. So he was able to get attention. But success never materialized with this effort to get it to production companies. So a version of this system was ported to the PC under the name the Music Creator, and it was bundled with a hardware MIDI interface. This is kind of the final desperation move, where there was a guy who was selling these MIDI interfaces, and he wanted to bundle it with some music software. Again, there's a complicated history, but he was looking for something. This fit the bill, and he put them together and sold them. They ran these ads in PC Magazine and like Guitar Magazine and a bunch of other music magazines throughout 1989. It didn't really sell very well. They quickly replaced this software with other software, and it's mostly forgotten. I did find evidence that people did buy this because there is one Usenet thread from 1989 where there's a couple of guys talking about this. But other than that, it is completely unknown outside of these ads. Unfortunately, the Amiga software is probably lost. So the Amiga software would have been developed on 3.5-inch floppies, which were tossed out. But the PC stuff was done on 5.25. So that's why we're able to. That was among the floppies that she sent to us. So that's kind of sad because I feel like the Amiga thing, in some ways, to me, was a little more exciting to see the interface, and it was using digital sound samples instead of like MIDI. But anyway, it's probably lost. I think like that photograph that I showed you, maybe pretty much the only leftover piece of that software. So after his failure to find a market for their new techniques, Kirschen and his wife Sally were in deep financial trouble. And they tried to use bankruptcy as a protection, but in Israel, the bank apparently can just transfer the debt to you personally. And so Kirschen joked to me, we even failed at bankruptcy. And of course, this is the humorist in him. You got to take a humorous look at that conclusion. And they had worked really hard on so many projects, and none of them succeeded in the way that they hoped that they would. And yet they found ways to keep going and to keep doing stuff. Okay, so like I said, the Amiga software is lost. But the Music Creator, the PC software, does exist. So if you are interested in trying it, some of the music is kind of interesting in this program. You can you can get the install discs from my website, Break in a Chat, and those are the original discs that we imaged. I took the installed files and tried to put them on the Internet Archive. However, while the program is working, the sound is not coming out, and we haven't figured out why yet. So you can try playing it on the Internet Archive, but no sound will come out of it. So I'm hoping that we get that fixed in the near future. So unfortunately, you can't try that immediately, but the discs are available if you're interested on my website. So 10 or 11 pieces of software that we saved. Pretty much all of these were things that were lost to time, and I'm just really glad I could have a part in saving them. But again, Kevin Ng, Keith Hack were the one, and then me, together the three of us. Keith did the bulk of the imaging. But we saved this software, and then I curated it, and that's where we are. So thank you so much for letting me have time to share this with you. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer anything that you want to ask. And then the last thing I would tell you is that I do want to keep writing about this. There is so much more to all these stories. I'm not sure what form that's going to take. It might be like a Substack. It may be like a book down the road or something. I'm not sure yet. But if you're interested and you want to follow the story, breakinachat.com. If you go to my blog, I've got a link where you can sign up with your email and just kind of subscribe to the blog. And as those things happen, I'm happy to tell you about it.
I'm just curious, have you ran across people that are doing the same thing for other genres or certain people? I mean,
You mean in terms of preservation?
Yeah, preservation. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
So what are some examples of those?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to get the name wrong. There was a Twitter account, which I think has moved to Mastodon now, called Obscuratory, and he was doing a lot of stuff related to, I believe it was SimCity, some really obscure internal stuff that they had, really fascinating stuff, and similar kind of thing of researching the history of it. So yeah, there are folks out there that are trying to take these deep dives and find these things that people didn't know about or that maybe didn't get saved. That one I think probably has more mass appeal than what I found, but these are really interesting. And you know what? I personally feel like there's a lot to learn from failure or from attempts that didn't succeed in maybe the ways that we hoped they would succeed. So I think these are important stories to tell.
And then if I can give another example, the learning company you mentioned.
Yes, yeah.
Robot Odyssey was one of the games that they used to teach digital logic, workbeats, handbeats, etc. And so actually, I helped try to produce the software, work on a remade version in Java and part of it in Java, and it worked and everything. But then somebody else came along and took the original assembly, converted it, and now you can play that on the Internet Archive.
Yeah.
I mean, so it happens, right? But,
Yeah.
you know, for a lot of these things that could be lost otherwise. Yeah, digital preservation.
Yeah, no, there are really cool projects. People like trying to resurrect Prodigy, like the old online service Prodigy, and similar, some other services. There's one, I'm going to get it screwed up. Thomas Cherryholmes, I believe, is the guy behind it, and I think it's Plato, Plato, which was an online service that had like this vector graphics terminal, and he has written new modern Plato terminals for like every retro computer, like the Atari ST, the Apple II, all these different platforms. And he has this service running now, like an emulated version of what would have been the Plato service. And he's folded in all this other cool functionality into these little devices and this terminal that he's created. There's a million fantastic projects like that are going on. Yeah.
From the chat room, Kurt Winston asks, what is Sam Trammell up to today? Did he give you the attorney Jack works with?
He did not tell me what he's up to today. His answers were very short, but he obliged me by answering and answering follow-ups as well. But I kept my questions really targeted. So I don't know what he's up to today, but he is answering email if you are very persistent. I tried emailing. His brother Leonard still has an internet presence. I've tried to find every email address I could. I tried to find their postal address and send them letters. I should say that part of how I'm able to do this stuff is I am a journalist, and I'm really good at finding people. And I'm really good at getting in touch with people that maybe have never, that haven't been in touch about something in a long time. And so I tried really hard, and eventually, I don't know if Leonard got tired of seeing my emails in his box and he finally forwarded it to Sam, or I don't know what happened, but he did write back eventually, and it blew my mind when it happened. So I never thought I'd actually get a Tramiel to write to me, so that was pretty awesome.
Do you do all of this through like your personal identity, or do you ever try to like leverage your Josh at Post Dispatch to get responses from people?
So it's always through my personal stuff, and you know, there's a strict separation between what I do at work and what I, like my hobby. I will sometimes say that like I'm a professional journalist by day, and by night I'm like an amateur computer historian, because that is what I am. I'm not by any means an academic or a professional historian, but I love genealogy, I love research, I love looking into old stuff, and I'm able to kind of, one outlet for that is journalism, and another outlet has been this kind of research, and this kind of, like I said earlier, sometimes taking these old things and then trying to find new things to do with them. Something I didn't talk about tonight that I'd be happy to come back and talk more about in the future if you're interested is some of the Atari ST software that I've saved related to bulletin board systems. And some of that is source code. And so we started to play around with, there's a particular game called Thieves Guild, where we were able to save some of the source code, and there was an unreleased PC version of it. We were able to make some tweaks and kind of get it running. And so those kind of things appeal to me too, of trying to find maybe stuff that nobody did with, and maybe we can get it running now, or make it do something new. So I don't know, I'm not super great at that, but it is something that I'm interested in. And sometimes you can find another person who's really good at the coding part and get them to help you. So.
So as far as like the part of that, like the digital archaeology of trying to find these disk images, aside from just putting the name of the software in quotes in Google and searching for it, like what is some of the stuff you use to try to find?
Yeah. Okay. So the tools have changed over time. There is one tool, a new tool that is really great for looking through old stuff called Diskmaster. It's a sort of a Jason Scott. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's at the Internet Archive. He made the BBS documentary and Get Lamp, which is a documentary about interactive fiction. Extremely well-known archiving guy. He is hosting this project called Diskmaster on his website. It's DISC, diskmaster.textfiles.com, and it's an old school interface, but what it is a search engine into the disk images, the zips, the CD-ROMs, the ISOs that are on the Internet Archive and elsewhere. So like right now, you can't really search inside of that stuff. Like the Internet Archive is full of like FTP archives, but they're all kind of like zipped up, and you can't really search within it. Until now, you had to like download this 20 gigabyte thing, extract it, and then try to search inside of it on your own machine. Diskmaster is making it possible to search inside of it. Not only can you search inside of it, if it finds images, it will render them as images, and it tries to be smart and parse out some of the stuff that's inside of these materials. So that is a really amazing tool that did not exist a year ago. It's like literally brand new, and they are stuffing new things into it every day, like literally every day. So that would not have helped me too much on this. There's not very much Kirschen stuff in there. Believe I've been checking very regularly to see if anything pops in. But for other more popular genres of stuff, there's all kinds of really cool things you can find in there. Like for me, this research involved old school and modern stuff. So it is searching Google. It's going to places like Google Groups and searching Usenet, searching FidoNet posts. Because Google is not as great of a search engine as it used to be, and will not find you everything. So like if you want to search Usenet, you really have to go to Google Groups or to somebody that has an archive of Usenet. So that's one place. And then another place is like old newspapers. You don't find them very much on Google anymore. But so I have taught at Webster University as a journalism class at Webster. So I have Webster library credentials, and I use their ProQuest account, and then sometimes I use like the county library has some access for searching ProQuest. You can look through old academic papers, you can look through old newspapers, and sometimes you'll find unexpected things in those newspapers. And then it's just stuff like finding these, like I mentioned, the Renaud Museum holds the papers of a woman from Atlanta who was part of the Atlanta Jewish Federation, who's the one who commissioned these programs. I never would have dreamed I would find that. And it was a gold mine of just really cool stuff that I wouldn't have found any other way. And then of course interviews, tracking down people and finding people and actually talking to them. And as you talk to them, you learn names of other people to talk to. And like I said, when I said that I've talked to dozens of people, I really mean that. Some of them, it wasn't very much of a conversation. And others, it was extended or multiple.
So it might seem a little meta, but how do you make sure that then this research doesn't?
That's a great question. Well, for one thing, everything I've done so far, my website, Break In and Chat, actually every website I've ever done, that's for me personally, has never had advertising on it, or has never been like a walled garden. All of my stuff is completely open, is completely free. I put absolutely no restrictions on it, and I've never made a dime from any of this. This is just for my own love of it. I just do it because I love it. So my website is ingested into like the Wayback Machine, and like I have taken the steps of getting all this software onto the archive. Although the Atari ST stuff, they don't have an Atari ST emulator that works yet on the Internet Archive. The software is there, but the emulation is not there yet. And then, like I said, the PC, the software is there, but there's some quirk in the emulation. So the software is at least on the archive. In terms of my website, one potential future step would be to take some of these, or to take the corpus of everything I've written. My website is 10 years old as of last November. So I mean, I could like PDF it all out and dump PDFs onto the archive as a kind of way to save it. Another potential thing that I've thought about is trying to convert some of it to a book form. I think with the BBS stuff, there might be a potential book, even if it's just a collection of the interviews and nothing else. I think that could be a book. So that might be a way down the road. But certainly the websites are online and they are open, like the Wayback Machine scrapes, I don't prevent any of that. And don't stop anyone else who might want to scrape it either. So
you have emulators that you run it in eventually once you upload it. But if somebody comes to you with media, how do you go from media that might be 40 years old to something which may or may not be in good condition, the systems may or may not be fully functional? How do you go from there?
yeah, that's a great question. So in this case, so I did have these discs that were one of a kind and really unique. And so I don't have any Apple II equipment, or I mean, I did use an Apple II as a kid in school, so I'm familiar with it, but I'm not nowhere close to being an expert or even like super technically fluent in it. So when I received those discs, I wanted to do right by them, and I reached out to 4AM, who's the well-known Apple II hacker, who has just been on a spree for years, archiving Apple II discs left and right, tons of stuff. And so I reached out to 4AM on Twitter years ago and asked who could help me with this. So he's the one who pointed me to Keith Hack here in town. And Keith had, I believe he did this using an applesauce, I think. Applesauce is kind of the top of the line, Apple II specifically disk imaging setup. There's other things like the Chiroflux or Cryoflux, and there's other solutions. But he had an applesauce, which was the ideal way to image these Apple II disks. His method was, I believe, generally to, at least with Apple II disks, which are lower density, so those 5 1/4 inch disks, he would try reading them successive times. So if the first reading was bad, he tried again 2, 3, 4 times, and each reading would usually get better because it actually kind of cleaned the disk as it went. He told me that for really bad disks, I believe if I recall correctly, he was using alcohol to physically clean the media when it was in super bad condition. Obviously doing that very carefully. I think there were probably a few discs that he didn't get a good read, and on those he would do like a cryoflux image, make a flux image of them. But generally, all the good ones he made DSK disc images. I am not a disc imaging expert by any means, and so like if I were to, like Sally, Ariel, and Ya'akov Kirschen are in the middle of moving apparently right now. They're downsizing to another place. They're leaving their home of the last 22 years. And she just messaged me a week ago to say, hey, I found some more Murray and Mom in antique packaging. So I don't know if there is one piece missing. We don't have the monochrome version of Mom. I don't know if that's going to be among the things that she sends. And I'm hoping, I don't think they're going to find anything, but I'm hoping maybe they will turn up some of this Amiga stuff that's lost. Probably won't happen, but you don't know. So if we do get that stuff, I will probably turn to other experts to help me, just to be safe with that, because I'm also not an Amiga expert either, and I don't have any Amiga hardware. So I'll probably seek out help if that were to turn out.
Yeah, I would think this would be something that the Jewish community would be here and love to hear.
Yeah, I agree. So there is an Israeli retro computing group that I shared this with, and so they kind of saw some of this. But yeah, there is. I think it would be a good story for the Jewish community. So the Apple II software that I showed, that was really specifically Jewish education software, it has a weird. I did not get into this in the presentation, but that also was not a commercial success as far as I understand. I'm not sure that they really ever sold it. Although that was their intention. I don't think they figured out how to sell it. And so what ended up happening is that Kirschen, on his own, I don't know if he had permission to do this or not, but he, around 87, so this is years after the software was made, provided it to the Carolina Association of Jewish Educators, I think, CAJE, in North Carolina, and they were selling it at cost around 1987 to different similar Jewish education groups. And I found a little teeny article from one of their Jewish education newsletters where they mentioned that they had sold it like a few dozen, including in St. Louis. So someone in St. Louis had those discs for some brief time in the late 80s. I'm sure that they probably don't exist anymore, but maybe there's a few people who might remember this. I don't know. It got out in little dribs and drabs, but by and large, I don't think, it's when you see the game. I mean, they're of enough quality that you would have thought it would get out there, but it didn't. It didn't. Well, thank you very much for having me. I really had a great time.